July 25th, 2019 edition of the Fire on the Fives, brought to you by the National Weather Service Fire Weather Program. Fire on the Fives is a webinar series that presents the latest science and best practices regarding the fire environment and fire weather. Please ensure that you mute your phone or use the audio pin provided. Please do not put your phone on hold. Thank you. You must use the audio pin provided by the GoToWebinar if you wish to be unmuted during the question and answer session. If you are unable to use the pin, you may post your question in the question box in your GoTo control panel, and the moderator will ask the question for you. Talks will be recorded and posted at the NWS, National Weather Service Fire Weather YouTube channel, which can be found at the address below. Or you can do a search on YouTube for NWS Fire Fives. Today's presenter is Bill Schulberg. Bill is the Senior Systems Engineer for ProTech and also the Joint Polar Satellite Systems Program Liaison to the user community. Bill will be talking about the latest in wildland fires and remote sensing. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate the introduction. You know, I may have met some of you who are on our recording today. So if I have, it's great to see you again. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about JPSS and what we've done with the fires community supporting this really important mission. It's interesting as I thought about what is it that I think would be of value to talk about today, I realized, well, I know exactly what it is. I have Evan Ellicott, who is a key member of our Fire and Smoke Initiative team. He gave a science seminar back in January. We recorded it, and I thought, I don't have to have Evan live. I can just have him on audio and the slides, and I think it would be very interesting. So that's the approach I wanted to take, and I got approval to do that, and we're just going to start there. I may have occasion to say a few words. If so, I'll just ask to pause. Otherwise, we'll leave some time at the end of this presentation for any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. So go ahead and press on.
Thank you, Bill. Welcome, everyone. I know it's been a long time since we've gotten together. In this case, we did not have to postpone our seminar. I guess it worked out just right, I believe. You know, every year we always say that, boy, it's been a very active year for wildfires, like the most ever. And it seems like every year we always say it's the most ever. And last year, again, was a very active year. And it seems like we have more active wildfires every single year. We're very fortunate that within program science, we have a proving ground that focuses on fire and smoke. And we're fortunate that Evan Ellicott is one of our key contributors to the proving ground. Evan is going to talk to us about wildland fires and remote sensing. He's an associate research professor in the Department of Geographical Sciences at University of Maryland. His research interests include the exploration of geospatial data to describe and characterize biophysical phenomena and the interactions with society. A primary focus of his research is biomass burning, specifically wildfires, in a changing physical and social environment. He explores methods to estimate biomass burning emissions and fuel consumptions using satellite data and in situ measurements. Another component of his research is to investigate land cover and land cover use as a result of global, something on commodity trades related to large-scale acquisitions, I think. I'm reading from his bio, and his pictures on top of some words that he has, and so that's why I can't read those words exactly. So I apologize for that. So Evan will start his presentation now. Again, it's on wildfires and remote sensing.
Thank you, Mitch. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining me on the first day back from the shutdown. So I'm going to talk about wildland fires and remote sensing. I think we're all in the same wheelhouse here, so maybe some of this information won't be new to you, but hopefully some of the insights that I have gathered over the years as part of the Proving Ground effort will be new or interesting and insightful. So I guess the way we're going to work this is I'm going to say next slide. Is that right, Bill? Or do I have control?
Correct. I got it.
Okay. So if you go next slide, I'll just give you a brief outline of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll go a little bit into just a background and introduction about the Proving Ground, about interest in wildfires. Again, I think I'm speaking to an audience that knows a lot of this information already. But what is the Proving Ground? What do we do? The focus, from my standpoint, is primarily outreach, education, or what we could call capacity building. Although I do some evaluation of the product. This past year, there was a program called the Visiting Scientist Program where I stayed with two different coordination centers, and I'll talk more about that for about a week each. And then the point of that is to see how do they work, how are the operations, to be, as the call for the proposal to be a part of the program suggested, to embed yourself and really be there day in and day out and see how operations work, what they need, what are their limitations, what do they want, and bring that back to our community to discuss how we can help them. Then I'll talk a little bit about product evaluation, past and future prescribed fire campaigns. And then if there's time, I'll talk about a recently accepted paper for publication about wildland fuels in emissions and energy release, how it relates to the types of fuels, fuel condition, and so forth. So we can go to next slide. So background, this isn't going to be new to any of us. As Mitch just pointed out, it seems like every year things get a little bit worse. It depends on where you are. If you're in maybe Alaska one year, it's not worse, but it's just a matter of time before the cycle comes back around and Alaska has a terrible year, and maybe California is not as bad. But certainly the activity has been predicted through numerous publications. I've only cited two here, but you can see that Westerling's paper goes back over 12 years now, that the frequency and intensity of fires across the globe is going to increase with change, climate change, but there's also a component that we don't often think about, is that the human interaction, and how many fires are actually started by humans. If anybody knows the number, you probably close to something like 90%. So that is one of the reasons there's an interest in wildland fire activity. And I say wildland, but it often is not really wildland. A lot of it is also agricultural fires. So we need timely, accurate data for operations and research, but really that bridging the R to O, research to operations, to improve things like fire spread models, fire prediction, risk analysis, and then provide a term borrowed from the military but used extensively in firefighting operations is situational awareness, getting a handle on where are the boots on the ground and where is the fire and what can we say about where it's going to go in the future. And that future could be within seconds to minutes to days. So if you go next slide. So I showed this on the first slide. This is the Whitewater Baldy fire from New Mexico. And this is sort of a prototypical picture of what someone might think of when they think of wildland fire. Sort of a mixed conifer environment, matrix of different fuel types, dry conditions. But if you go to the next slide, the reality is we're seeing fires more like this, where we're in a wildland urban interface, and you're burning through towns. And I work with some folks here at the University of Maryland who are structure firefighting researchers, so the Department of Fire Engineering, and we've been exploring fire activity and fire brands and how that propagates a fire through the dispersion of spotting, and what threshold do you reach when these embers are landing on people's roofs, and then essentially you jump maybe a mile or two in the case of like the Thompson fire, where you're moving the fire forward, not just by the typical spread of radiation convection and moving through the fuel canopy, but you're actually spotting embers much further ahead of the fire line. If you go to the next slide, most of you are probably familiar with the role that remote sensing can play in this campaign. We're talking about using the selected channels that can, in many cases, see through some level of smoke as long as it's not too thick, so there won't be obscuration. But we're looking at around the 4-micron channel to characterize the radiation that's coming off the fire for either a measurement or an estimate of the energy or the instantaneous energy, or simply just to get there's a thermal anomaly and it's likely a fire. And the improvements over the years to the algorithms and detection capabilities have been profound, and you're seeing more and more satellites having this capability of quote unquote seeing the fire. If you go to the next slide, this is an example of fire activity across the globe. This is from the SWOMI MPP VIIRS I-band or imagery band, 375 meter as the nominal resolution. And you can see activity is not, when I talk to folks in this country, we often think, oh, this is a very big problem in the US. They're often amazed to see how much fire activity occurs globally. So the point is, you can't get this kind of synoptic view without relying on satellite data. So you go to the next slide. So the VIIRS active fire product, and this started many years ago. I'm starting to realize how old I'm getting now, but the active fire product was expected to be used for real-time resource and disaster management, specifically for wildland fires. And luckily, some things happened with the channel in terms of saturation, so that it is a better sensor than we first thought we were getting. And so the JPSS program started this proving ground and risk reduction with the main objective being to how do we maximize the benefits of performance of the data and the algorithms and get it to the downstream users. And by this, we're talking about anywhere in the chain of command from the incident all the way up to the national level, and all the players that are in between there. And if you go next slide. So this is just a scratch of the surface of the application. So the product is used in many times at these geographical area coordination centers, or GACs. And these centers are tasked with coordinating and mobilizing for wildland fire incidents. Some additional applications, though, are Wilfred Schroeder, who's over at NOAA now, and Janice Cohen have looked into initializing fire behavior and spread models by using the detections and reinitializing every time new detections are available. I know there's some folks on this telecom that are doing similar work. There's the folks like Ravon who's working with the HER smoke model and using the fire radiative power estimates to estimate injection height for their smoke plume modeling. And then you have Shobha, who may or may not be on the line, but her group working with EIDEA and fire intensity and aerosol optical thickness. And so a big part of the proving ground and risk reduction is how do you get these tools to the people on the ground who may or may not want them? So that's a question we'll get to in a moment. So if you go to the next slide. So when I first headed out to some of the fires, and I had done firefighting in the past, so luckily I was well suited. I had my red card. I could go on the fire and get on the incident and get a chance to talk with folks. And one of the first fires I went to was the West Fork complex back in 2013 in Colorado. And it was quite a fascinating fire because it had sort of bridged across two different ridges. So there was actually two incident command centers. And so the idea was to go here and talk to the incident meteorologists at first. And then we discovered that through this dialogue, there were other stakeholders that really were interested in the products that are available from NPP or MODIS. And there was a lot of questions that they had. So I'll go through some of the things that I have learned through this process. What you're seeing in this photo, though, is in the upper left is the rim fire incident briefing in the morning. So that same fire that year was one of the largest, or the largest fire for maybe a year until another fire came along and surpassed it. And then the upper right, there's the squad boss talking. He's the one with the helmet on, talking to the two fire behavior analysts who spend most of their day moving around or in the incident command. The lower left is CAL FIRE's coordination center, and it's co-located with the Southwest GAC down in Southern California and Riverside. And then the lower right is some prescribed fires that we've done here, and you can kind of make out in the smoke plume a silver beam. It's a tower holding a radiometer. So what, in that case, I'll get to it later, we're looking to do some validation of the overpass of veers and motas, really anything that might be coming over while the fire is burning. And then the radiometer is measuring the fire intensity, the FRP, and see how that matches up with what the satellite is telling us. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So the Proving Ground Risk Reduction program was, from my standpoint, there's other programs with different focus. Mine is on the VIIRS active fire product. As you already know, it's operational not only on SMPP, but now NOAA 20. It's widely used, particularly the 375-meter hotspots, which I don't think initially was what people had thought or intended was going to be used, but thanks to Wilfred Schroeder doing a lot of work on developing the algorithm for that, that has become very popular from the folks I speak to on the ground. So since its inception, 6 years ago, the idea was to get user buy-in and get feedback so that we could simultaneously improve algorithms, products, and maybe the most important is access to the data. How quickly could we get it to people, and what do they want? So I'm going to highlight some of the progress we've made over the years with some of these outreach activities, and if there's time, we'll talk more about some of the CAL, VAL, and evaluation, and then other experiments we're doing. So this is just a quick list. This is not all-encompassing, but I just kind of slapped a couple of things I could think of off the top of my head that we have attended over the past several years. And so some of these are more scientifically oriented, like the TIFRSAC, the Tactical Fire Remote Sensing Advisory Committee, or done some training with NASA and NOAA, to being on incidents and going to some of the workshops that they have, like end-of-year wrap-up meetings. If you go to the next slide, some of this outreach has been focused, well, not some, actually a lot has been focused in Alaska for several good reasons. One is Alaska has a lot of wildfires, truly wildfires, more often than not lit by or ignited by lightning strikes. They have a very similar pattern every year of when this activity occurs. They want to know things like when is snow melt occurring, when is green up occurring, and because that sort of plays this cascade role of how the weather and the fuels are getting into the right conditions to basically start a fire and propagate it. They're also in a advantageous position when it comes to polar orbiting satellites. So that's why you see the overpass in the middle, the trajectories for the overpasses over Alaska. So I've spent a number of days up there over the past several years working with GINA, which is the Geographical Information Network. Is that right? Geospatial, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank, but GINA is co-located at the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, and it's their direct broadcast station. So they disseminate a lot of the data directly to the Alaska Fire Service. So if you go to the next slide, some of what my time is spent on is education. So I'm learning, it's a two-way channel. I'm learning what are their limitations, what are they looking for, and what often it's what is not helpful. They might, for example, in Southern California, as opposed to Alaska, the satellite detections are often too late to be of help for that first spotting of a fire. There's so many people in Southern California that if a fire starts, people are going to see it on the side of the road and call it into their local fire department. In Alaska, that's a different story. Huge state, sparsely populated. So there's that engagement I have. And part of that is also the training to talk about where should we get data. There's a lot of sites out there to get data, and they're often confusing, they're redundant, and they often don't include a lot of information about what people are seeing. You're just seeing dots on a map. And I'm showing 6 here, from NASA to NOAA to some NGOs and then the Forest Service. The upper right is Fire EGP, and this was developed by the Sean Triplett at the National Interagency Coordination Center in Boise. And this, I've noticed, has become more popular. It's a common operating pictures. So unlike, say, NASA or NOAA, he's not producing the data. He's just scraping the web using APIs or other ways of getting the data from various sources and allowing the users to then decide what they want to see to help inform their decision making. Some of it, as I said, if you go to the next slide, this is a quick slide showing pixel area aggregation and how pixels will grow with the scan angle, or how are the channels slightly different between MODIS and VIIRS, because a lot of the folks in the fire community are familiar with MODIS. So just explaining some basic details about the similarities and differences between these sensors, which ties in, if you go to the next slide, as I mentioned earlier, there was the Visiting Scientist Program. So that occurred this year, where I was embedded in 2 regional wildfire operation centers, or GACs, the one in Southern California in Riverside and the other in Fairbanks at Alaska. And so what it offered was a really thorough exchange of knowledge and ideas, understanding the operations. A lot of times I'm sitting there just listening, as especially in Southern California. I think I have a slide showing where the Cranston fire blew up right down the road. And I'm hearing calls coming in over their dispatch, and I'm learning about how do they react to that, how do they respond. And I've noticed I've been to now 5 different GACs. None are the same. They all have, which makes sense. They sort of cater their operations to their environment, to their resources. So they're quite different. They might get a call in Alaska and they'll send a plane out because there's nobody out there, or there's very few people to observe a fire. In California, they've got, they're scraping things like Twitter feeds if people are putting information up available for them to take. So we go through the day-to-day operations. The idea is to help reduce some of the knowledge gaps and talk about things about where to get data, what some uncertainty you should be aware of, and the misuse of the data, and then get some feedback from these users to tell us how to improve, what are the issues that they've seen. And I'll give an example of some fires where we're seeing sort of a blooming. These are spurious detections that are, there's various reasons, but I'll show you that in a moment. Go to the next slide. So if you're not familiar with GACs, this just gives the overview of the various GACs across the country. You can see, given the activity in the West, their GACs tend to be smaller. They're also highly populated in these areas, but you see the Northwest covers 2 states, and then California is actually broken into 2, where Alaska, obviously that doesn't give you the relative size of Alaska to the U.S., but they're covering an enormous amount of area in Alaska. So in Southern California, if you go to the next slide, I went to Riverside. My point of contact was Tom Rolinski. He has now left actually the Predictive Services program there. And I met with, this is just a quick list of folks, whether they're doing dispatch, or Rob, who is the meteorologist giving briefs every day, battalion chief and Intel, both on the Forest Service and CAL FIRE side. So learning what do they do, how much area do they cover, where do they get information from, and what questions do they have for me as I'm posing questions to them. If you go to the next fire, as I said, the Cranston fire blew up while I was there. It was started by an individual who was throwing flares out of his car. And so it was pretty easy for people to call in quickly. I forgot the major highway that he was driving along doing this. It started at about 10 acres around noon, and it by afternoon was already up to 3,000 acres. It eventually burned 13,000 acres. And the individual was eventually arrested not long after, because it wasn't hard to spot who was doing it. You can go to the next slide. I think it just gives the overview of the Cranston fire. But it was a good opportunity to see in Southern California how operations were playing out for deploying resources, what information were they using, and what could they use in the future. If you go to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, CAL FIRE and U.S. Forest Service is kind of a unique situation at the Riverside GAC. They're co-located, so they share a lot of the same resources. You could see the sort of intelligence room here is CAL FIRE one side, Forest Service on the other. The meteorologist from the Forest Service side of things, Rob, he's giving the briefing to both sides. So they're sharing, which is a great way of doing it. Some of the things that they talked about, they suffer from poor bandwidth, and they have for quite some time. They're moving to a new center eventually, but their AWIPS, which I've often asked, how does AWIPS play into your operations? They really don't use it. They were using some off-the-shelf Simu AWIPS software that you could purchase, but they were limited by this bandwidth. And I talked with folks in Colorado about how that could be improved going forward. They also use the Fire EGP I mentioned earlier. They have these large TVs in the situation rooms, whether it's intel or dispatch, where they're looking at new detections as they come up online. But that was primarily CAL FIRE. And CAL FIRE was really into the idea of deploying drones. And I know the Forest Service is changing their outlook on drones, but different agencies have their takes on the use, the benefit, the cost-benefit analysis of using drones or other geospatial data. CAL FIRE seemed more inclined to buy in at this time to some of that information, whether it's satellite detections, drones, what have you. And then what I discovered also, this is not new to most of us, but it's just where are they getting data from for things like forecasting. So if you go to the next slide, for all the websites that people make available, it's sort of like they get used to using the tools that they have to deliver the job that they need to get done every day. So if, like Rob is delivering a forecast, he's looking at things like temperature, relative humidity, wind and fuel conditions, and he'll go to MesoWest every day and other web sources. But there's also this misunderstanding of fire locations, and particularly pixel size, when they're looking at that fire enterprise program, the EGP. And there was little awareness of EIDIA, what aerosol optical thickness or FRP, how that could be beneficial in terms of estimates that they might be making. And that not just for meteorologists, but the LTANs, the long-term analysts, and the fire behavior analysts. If you go to the next slide, it's just talking about knowledge sharing. This is a screenshot when I was up in Alaska looking at what AWIPS was providing for them and what they were using. There's, as I said, some of the needs are they'd love to have better information about precipitation estimates, evaporative drought indices, and integration with snow cover and green up, particularly in Alaska. AWIPS in many places is not being used as much as I thought it would be. And I know there's some limitations there that are being improved. As I already said, there's some misunderstandings of fire locations and pixel size, and I'll give an example of that later. And then there's a knowledge resource gap between the National Weather Service and the, in this case, the Alaska Interagency Coordination Center. So AWIPS is better served up. I don't know how to better put it than that, but it's better served up for the Weather Service than it is for the meteorologists doing similar jobs, but at a coordination center. So there was some discussion at the end of this year or last year, how do we improve that gap? How do they get the same package so they're looking at the same thing? So I'll wrap up here with this portion, and if we have time, I'll continue on with some of the evaluation. But the lessons learned, the users have become more familiar and comfortable with satellite data, and I think that really started to occur with MODIS. But as they're being used, there's also increased data uncertainty, and that could be critical for any kind of decision making. So the product data requires ongoing improvement and user feedback, and we've seen that with VIIRS. And this idea of these spurious detections that are in many cases, we're seeing hotspots that are being detected that are not real, that are a result of superheated smoke plumes, and we need to work on improving the algorithm to address that. I mentioned already, reducing redundancy in terms of where to get data, what's being provided, so they're not just seeing dots on a screen, they understand what they're getting and how one source might be better than the other. Certainly a multi-sensor blended product would be advantageous to all to combine geostationary and polar orbiting, and I know that's undergoing right now. The AWIPS-2 improvements for GACs need to be addressed, and then additional efforts to get trainers to be the trainers, or rather to train the trainers, have folks who are at these GACs, and then have that propagate to other individuals in the firefighting community to learn, educate, and then get user buy-in. I don't know, Bill, do you want me to address questions now or move on to evaluation real quick?
No, I would say let's pause here for a second to give people an opportunity to ask questions on this section, and then we can move on. I think you have time to go to the second section. So I will pause very briefly to give people an opportunity to ask a question or two.
Hey, Bill, this is Shobha.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a comment regarding the awareness of these products at various user agencies. So what's the solution for that? Do we do roadshows instead of having workshops and inviting them, and usually users don't show up for these workshops that we host here because of various travel issues or limited budget at these regional offices. So I know NASA, with their applied science program, what they do is they do these roadshows where they go actually set up a workshop within each user agency and then educate them on the products for like a day or two. So do we have to take that approach? Or I'm just putting this question for open discussion to Evan and others.
I think that is the right approach. I mean, there's only so many of us who can go out and do that. The different programs like NASA RSET, who is in Alaska and training, that has been beneficial. They are, they become champions for the data when they understand it better. So if you can reach to it's finding the right stakeholders. So at Alaska, it's working with, there's a fire behavior, fire ecologist I've been working a lot with over the years, the GIS team there, because then they go and continue to demonstrate how they can use that data and improve upon what is maybe being presented at a national scale. They can kind of fine tune it for their local applications. Yeah, so I think it's more of that, and it's more of going, rather than inviting them to come, it's going to, like a couple years back when I went to Boise and presented at the end of year wrap-up meeting. So they're giving the different GACs are giving their wrap-up about what their year was like, and then here comes this interloper, if you will, and I'm talking about, well, here's what we found from the satellite community, and we've talked with you guys, and we want to know more about what are you using, what are the limitations. So I think that's one way of doing it.
And also, quick follow-up. So to me, it appears that like with the near real-time imagery products, at least through these websites that you guys have at University of Maryland or we have here at STAR, the operational folks seem to be getting to the images and then using them. But do you get requests for historical data to do retrospective analysis, and if so, what's the experience with the users accessing data from class?
Yes, and it depends on the level of knowledge and expertise of the end users. But yeah, I find that the again, this is figuring out who you're addressing, the audience, the fire behavior analysts, the fire ecologists, the fuels guys, or I shouldn't say guys, men and women who work on this before the fire season starts and then evaluate it afterwards, are looking for trends. I've helped get them data from class, and so yeah, they are interested in looking at historic data so that they can start and analyze these trends. Yeah, there's some folks up in, again, Alaska seems really keen on that because they're trying to understand what's happening. They're seeing change occurring more rapidly than the lower 48. But I have had requests from the folks in Portland too. So,
do you have to handhold and tell them how to access class? Because based on our experience for airfall, the minute you say, go to class and get the historic data, that's it, all the interest dies down.
Yes.
Which is very unfortunate.
Yes. So luckily, depending on who they are, I've had to handhold a little bit. I've given code to download the data and process it so that they can get it in a much simpler format. And then this is the idea, again, of training the trainers. There's a GIS specialist up at Alaska at the coordination center who I've worked with, and she's savvy with writing code and accessing data. So once I helped her, she was able to help others there do it. And so I don't really get involved anymore. I'm amazed at what they're doing, looking at trends and data. And they're looking at MODIS data, obviously, too, because they're trying to match the long term. But now they're also wondering, how do we match up MODIS with VEERS? So, yeah, there's going to be some handholding. It just depends on their skill set.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I guess I will bring up that, we do have the Fire and Smoke initiative in place where some of these discussions do occur, and what could be done better. And I think, not that, Evan, you can take sole credit, but I think your working with Alaskan there was helped make the meeting that we had up in Alaska, the summit, Alaska summit we had last year, all that more successful, because we weren't interlopers just kind of showing up and talking with the AICC folks. They knew who we were. They knew they knew from you and others the importance of what we're trying to do. And so sometimes it takes time. It just takes time to start the relationship, maintain the relationship, and get these issues on the table and discuss them.
Hey, Bill, this is Mitch. Another thing we're doing is we put together a training initiative, trying to get consistent training across the different initiatives. So it's sort of like, cross-cutting along the different initiatives. And the purpose of this is to really put together lessons learned on how we can better do consistent training. And one thing that comes up is, how do you make the training stick? So, for example, going to a particular site is really important. We recognize that. But also when new events arise, we can't rush out there. So one idea is to use like Google Hangout to reach to different communities when an event is taking place, or right before an event is going to take place. And to express the different tools that are available, and also to reach out and see if there's any questions they might have or any additional needs they might have that we could help them. And so I think it's going to be a combination of on-site training plus reinforcement training through tools like WebEx or Google Hangout.
Oh, absolutely. Good call. So Evan, I would say you have another. Okay, so this is probably a good place to stop. And there you go. You couldn't tell whether that was live or was that recorded. It's like you're hearing me twice. That's kind of scary. Okay, so I think that Evan did a very good job here of kind of capturing what not just JPSS, although because he supports JPSS, there was a focus there, but the Fire and Smoke initiative is really a joint initiative. And those of you who heard us talk either remotely in the IMET training or in Boise when we were up there some months ago know that we really make an effort to do that. But the success that we've had with these initiatives are first and foremost due to people who, if I have this right, there's 28 people listening in, people who have a need, people who think, gosh, things could go better. We could do this better. But who do I talk to? Where do I go? How do I get my ideas looked at and evaluated and maybe adopted? And so That's why I'm very happy to been given the opportunity to share this little bit here on the fire on the fives, and I will just allow any questions to come out if there are any.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
Any questions out there? I'm not seeing any in the question box. You can also, if you want to ask in person, you can, in the question box, I believe you can raise your hand, and I can unmute you, and you can ask your question. Bill, I'm going to do a follow-up in that, and maybe I missed this, but so this presentation was given the beginning of this year, 2019, correct?
Right. This was in January.
Okay.
It was the 28th of January.
Okay. So is there going to be another, are any other GACs going to be, I guess, visited?
Yes.
Was done.
As a matter of fact, we had a discussion in our last Fire and Smoke initiative. Our Evan is dusted off his red card and found his boots and is ready to go forward. I know he's talked with Robin a little bit about finding an opportune time to get out and to not only go out to a GAC perhaps, but also to a fire incident command post or something like that. So yeah, he is he's out there. He enjoys that sort of thing, fortunately, and so he will be out at one of the fires in the future. We also want to highlight Robin and some of the IMET support. I know John Bonk was up in Alaska recently, and we count him as an advocate of what we're trying to do. He's a frequent flyer in our meetings. So I think Mark Luffelbein and others, names you all recognize, I'm sure, are people that are participating in these meetings and bringing kind of the feedback, the lessons learned, however you want to say it, back to us. And we got plenty of phone lines. So if there are people out there that this kind of catches their interest, I sure invite them to send me an email. I can get you in touch with Evan if some of his slides are something that you would like to talk to him more about. I certainly have the recording that I could send out and the slides that recording is based on. So if somebody were to want to take a closer look, I could certainly make that happen. But like I said, if we're dealing with IMETs, with forecasters in the WFO, with people in the GAC, with wherever our fire specialists are, I think we can help.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Any questions out there? Ken Schneider, I see you have your hand up and you don't have your PIN put in. Could you put your question in the question box, and I'll read it off to Bill. We'll give Ken a moment here to see if he gets his question in.
Well, while we're waiting, I'll certainly the GOES East and West have been able to show some extraordinary imagery of smoke and of hot spots and things like that. We have found that often JPSS might lead the way in catching the fire initiation, and also at night giving a much better view of the perimeter, the fire perimeter. But we're also looking to use the fire radiated power in the smoke models, and so that gives a much better initiation, so people kind of know where that smoke is going to go, because that has an impact on conditions in a fire region. So not only impacting big cities way down the line from the fire, but also right there in the fire perimeter. So I'm hoping, and I know it's with especially Goes West now up and operating well, I know folks are looking at it, and I just encourage you to look at it even more. Take advantage of that. And if you're having trouble getting to it, we can get you hooked up with the right people to get you access to what you need. So did that burn up enough time to get the question in, or was that a...
I think so. Ken, we got your question. I'm not going to go ahead and read it on the air. We'll contact you later about that question. So we'll take that one offline. Any other questions or comments or concerns? I don't see any hands going up. So with that, I want to thank you, Bill.
Let me say one last thing. I know we talked about maybe towards the end of the fire season that we would be invited back, and I hope we will. I hope I didn't spoil it here. And at that point, what we'd like to do is talk about, okay, so how did we do? So just as an example, it was clear last year that the Western region, shout out to Andy Edmond and Mark Luffelbein, really made an effort to evaluate the HERS smoke model. And boy, I'll tell you, it just, I was so impressed with the comments, the feedback that we received. I'm not sure who of the now 26 people that are left, where you might be located or where you might end up. But please take a look at that. And as you're in the middle of it, maybe deployed, maybe working at a fire from a WFO, just jot some things down. Just especially anything satellite related, jot it down and say, "Gosh, I should follow up on that." Follow up on it. We'll address it, and we'll come back towards the end of the year. Although the fire season seems to keep going on and on and on. But towards the end of the year, and we'll address some of those issues. Okay?
We actually did get a question from Andrew Bailey as well. Andrew, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and you can ask your question in person here. You are now unmuted, Andrew.
Okay, great. Thanks. I was just going to ask if there's work ongoing at all to correlate what you're seeing in fire radiative power with some in situ measurements of fire line intensity. Whether that's something that you guys have been involved in.
Well, I mean, the work that is going on, and actually Evan is the one that's doing that. I mean, you saw some of his slides, and he and Will Schroeder will continue to do that sort of thing in terms of fire radiative power, and is it accurately reflecting what's really out there? And part of that is the scan angle, even in GOES. It may seem like, what's a couple of kilometers among friends, but it's really important to you guys out there that are fighting the fires, whether the perimeter is there or 4 or 5 kilometers over there. So I guess the answer is yes, we're working on it. We're looking at fire radiative power. We're looking to get it into the models, but we're also looking to see how it best represents both ABI and VIRS and MODIS, and how it represents what's really going on at any given time in a fire. So does that answer your question? I can certainly give you more detailed answer if you wish.
No, it does for now, and gives me kind of a place to check in with later. I missed the first 10 minutes, so I apologize if you went back over something that you had already had addressed.
Yeah, and what's going on, and Evan talked about the controlled fires, and that's really where some of that work is going on. And Evan is not only boots on the ground in California and Alaska, but he's also in South America and other places too with the international fire community. So if you have some specific, like what sort of evaluations are going on and who's doing them and what are the results of them, I just gave you kind of a broad brush. Yeah, trust me, they're going on. But I can certainly give that information or hook you up with Schroeder or Evan to get more of those details.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
More questions going once, going twice. Great. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, I think it worked out pretty good, except the flashing of, I don't know what exactly that was, but somebody's Hawaii picture on their desktop, but looked like. But otherwise, I thought it went well. So,
excellent.
Very good.
Okay.
Thanks.
That concludes today's episode of Fire on the Fives. You can catch this episode or any Fire on the Fives episode on YouTube by searching for NWS Fire Fives. This webinar is a presentation of the Fire Weather Program of the National Weather Service.